I learned the cost of competence the moment Director Graham Westfield silenced me in front of 20 executives. "You ask too many uncomfortable questions," he muttered, pulling me from the quarterly strategy review like a child being escorted from the adults' table. I'd spent 6 years at Megabit Technologies building their risk analysis framework from scratch, and now I was dismissed for doing exactly what they'd hired me to do. 3 days later, Graham burst into my office, face red, voice cracking. "Why didn't anyone challenge this mess?" The irony would have been funny if it hadn't cost the company $3 million. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever felt invisible at work despite being indispensable, if you've watched less qualified people get promoted while you're told to wait your turn, then you'll understand why I couldn't just let this go. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is about what happens when silence stops being golden and starts being strategic. Let me take you back to where it actually began. I joined Megabit Technologies in early 2017 as a junior risk analyst, one of 3 people in a department that didn't technically exist yet. The company was riding high on a series of successful product launches, expanding from $12 million in annual revenue to pushing $60 million by the time I'd been there 18 months. I worked 70-hour weeks building predictive models, establishing vendor compliance protocols, and creating the financial guardrails that allowed sales and product development to move fast without destroying everything. My manager, Stephen Young, was brilliant but overwhelmed. He relied on me to run the operational side while he handled executive relationships and board presentations. I didn't mind. I had a mortgage on a modest house in the suburbs, a daughter starting middle school, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing my work mattered. When Stephen moved to the CFO's office in 2019, he promised he'd bring me up as risk director within 2 years. That promise dissolved the moment Graham Westfield joined as vice president of operations in early 2020. Graham came from a larger firm where he'd apparently impressed someone important, though none of us could figure out who or why. He had an MBA from a respectable program and the kind of confidence that mistakes credentials for competence. Within 3 months, he'd reorganized operations to report directly to him, absorbed risk analysis into his division, and installed his former colleague Todd Brenner as the new risk director, my new boss, despite my seniority, expertise, and institutional knowledge. Todd was pleasant enough, but he knew almost nothing about our systems. He'd ask me to explain basic concepts in meetings, then present those same explanations to executives an hour later as his own insights. I swallowed it. Single mother, mortgage, daughter's college fund that needed feeding. I told myself it was temporary, that competence would eventually win out. I was wrong. The pay disparity came to light in the most mundane way possible, a printer jam in HR. I was collecting routine compliance documents one Tuesday afternoon when I noticed the paper tray had spit out someone's salary data. Professional ethics said I should ignore it, but human curiosity is what it is. I glanced down and saw Todd's compensation package, base salary $95,000, with a 20% performance bonus structure. My base was $68,000. Same bonus structure, different universe of actual money. I felt sick. 6 years of building systems, training new analysts, staying late to fix other people's mistakes, and I was making 28% less than someone who'd been there 8 months and still asked me how to access the vendor database. But salary gaps happen, right? Maybe Todd had negotiated better. Maybe I should have asked for more when I started. Then I found out about Caitlin. Caitlin Okonkwo joined the team 4 months after Todd, fresh from graduate school with impressive credentials but zero practical experience. Lovely person, sharp mind, eager to learn. I spent weeks training her on our protocols. 3 months in, I overheard her on a phone call discussing apartment hunting, mentioning she could afford a nicer place than expected because the $72,000 base is higher than the market average for entry level. She was making more than me. A woman I'd personally trained, with a fraction of my experience, was earning more than I was. The math was impossible to ignore. This wasn't market fluctuation or negotiation skill. This was systematic. I went home that evening and did something I should have done years earlier. I opened a spreadsheet and started documenting everything. Every project I'd led, every crisis I'd resolved, every system I'd built. Then I searched industry salary data for risk analysts with my experience level in our region. The range was clear, $85,000 to $110,000 for senior positions. I was being underpaid by at least 25%, possibly 40%. The betrayal settled into my chest like a stone. I'd given this company my best years, sacrificed time with my daughter, delayed my own career development to serve their growth, and they'd rewarded that loyalty by systematically undervaluing me. But here's what I've learned: anger without strategy is just noise. I needed to understand the full picture before deciding what to do about it. Over the next 2 weeks, I became very friendly with people in HR and finance. Not suspiciously friendly, just the casual conversations that happen when you're both in the break room or waiting for a conference room to free up. I learned that Graham had pushed hard to bring Todd in at that salary level, arguing they needed senior talent to elevate the department's credibility with the board. I learned that Caitlin's offer had been processed as a competitive counteroffer match even though she hadn't had another offer. Someone had simply assumed she did and inflated the initial proposal. And I learned that when Stephen had tried to promote me to director 2 years earlier, Graham had blocked it, telling the executive team that I was technically strong but lacked leadership presence. Leadership presence. The same phrase companies use when they mean someone doesn't fit their image of what a leader should look like. Usually applies to women, people of color, anyone who doesn't match the template. I had presence enough to run the department while Todd figured out where the bathroom was, but not enough to have the title and salary that matched. I stopped being angry. Anger is hot and impulsive and makes you do stupid things. I got cold instead. Calculated. I started thinking about leverage. Here's what most people don't understand about corporate revenge: it's not about burning everything down. It's about understanding the system well enough to make it work for you instead of against you. I had advantages that took me a moment to fully appreciate. First, I had complete access to our risk management systems and historical data. Second, I'd built most of our documentation protocols, which meant I knew exactly what existed and where it lived. Third, I was invisible enough that nobody monitored what I looked at or analyzed. I started pulling data. Nothing illegal, nothing I wouldn't have accessed for routine work, but I was looking at it through a different lens now. Contract terms we'd flagged as problematic but executives had overridden. Vendor relationships where we'd documented compliance concerns that were subsequently ignored. Financial projections where I'd noted unrealistic assumptions that made it into board presentations anyway. The pattern became obvious quickly: Graham's division had been taking aggressive risks to hit growth targets, and every single time the risk team had raised concerns, those concerns had been dismissed or buried. I'd been too focused on doing my job to realize the full scope. We'd documented everything properly, that was the training I'd drilled into the team, but that documentation had been treated as box checking rather than actual guidance. Then came the quarterly strategy review. These reviews happened every 3 months, bringing together department heads to assess performance and plan the next period. I usually didn't attend, that was director-level territory, but Todd had caught the flu, so Graham told me to come prepared to answer technical questions if needed. I should sit quietly unless directly addressed. The meeting started normally enough. Sales presented strong numbers, product development showcased the roadmap, finance walked through budget variances. Then Graham stood up to present operations, and I felt my stomach tighten as his slides appeared. He was proposing a new vendor partnership that would cut our procurement costs by 18% while expanding our product capabilities. Beautiful slides, compelling narrative, impressive projected savings. Just one problem: we'd evaluated that exact vendor 8 months earlier and rejected them for failing multiple compliance requirements. I'd written that assessment myself. I waited for Graham to mention the prior evaluation. He didn't. I waited for someone else in the room to remember. Nobody did. The CEO, Helen Vasquez, looked genuinely excited. This could be transformative for our margins. What's the timeline for implementation? Graham smiled. We can have contracts signed within 6 weeks if we move decisively. I shouldn't have spoken. I knew that even as I raised my hand slightly. But 6 years of professional integrity wouldn't let me sit there while we walked into a documented disaster. Excuse me, I said quietly. We assessed this vendor previously. There were significant compliance issues. The room went silent. Graham's smile froze. Helen looked confused. What compliance issues? She asked. I kept my voice level. Data security protocols that didn't meet our standards, financial stability concerns based on their debt ratios, and quality control problems documented in references from 3 existing clients. We have a full assessment report from last August. Graham's face shifted from frozen smile to something darker. That assessment was preliminary and didn't account for subsequent improvements the vendor has made. Has someone verified those improvements? I asked. Because the compliance criteria haven't changed, and I haven't seen updated documentation. Remy. Graham's voice had an edge now. This isn't the appropriate forum for technical minutiae. If you have concerns, we can discuss them separately. But Helen was engaged now, leaning forward. No, this seems relevant. Do we have that previous assessment available? I can pull it immediately, I offered. That won't be necessary right now, Graham interrupted. The point is that circumstances have evolved, and we need to be flexible rather than trapped by outdated analysis. Helen looked between us, clearly trying to assess the dynamic. Graham, let's table this item until next week. I'd like to review that prior assessment and understand what's changed. Remy, can you send me that report? Of course, I said. Graham's jaw was tight. Certainly. Though I think we should discuss internally first to provide appropriate context. The meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. I'd embarrassed Graham in front of the executive team by knowing more than he did about his own proposal. I'd questioned his judgment implicitly. Worse, I'd been right, and everyone in that room knew it. We broke for lunch, and Graham caught my arm as I headed for the door. His grip was just slightly too firm to be friendly. You ask too many uncomfortable questions, he muttered, steering me toward the hallway. I think it's best if you head back to your desk. We'll call if we need technical input. I pulled my arm free gently but firmly. I'm happy to provide whatever information would be helpful. I said we're fine. His voice was low enough that nobody else could hear, but the message was clear. Take the afternoon to focus on your regular work. That's where you add the most value. So I left. I walked back to my office with my face hot and my hands shaking, not from fear but from the crystalline clarity of understanding exactly where I stood. I'd just been punished for being competent. For doing the job they claimed to value. For having institutional memory that contradicted executive ambition. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes, staring at my monitors, feeling the weight of 6 years of swallowed frustration pressing down on my shoulders. Then I opened my personal email and started composing a message to my friend Olivia Crane, who'd left corporate life 2 years earlier to start an employment law practice. I think I need advice, I wrote. Can we meet for coffee? The next 2 days were strange. Graham didn't speak to me directly, but Todd came by Tuesday morning with an awkward smile and a vague suggestion that maybe I should be more mindful of hierarchy in executive settings. The implication was clear: shut up and stay in your lane. I smiled and nodded and continued documenting everything. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. Internal extension. Graham. Conference room C, now, he said, and hung up. I saved my work, grabbed a notebook, and walked down the hall with my heart pounding but my expression calm. The conference room door was open. Graham was there, pacing. So was Veronica Hayes from HR, looking uncomfortable. And Helen Vasquez, our CEO, sitting at the head of the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Close the door, Graham said. I closed it and sat down without being invited. Small power move, but I was done being deferential. Remy, Helen began, we've been reviewing the vendor situation you raised on Monday. Graham has provided context, but I wanted to hear directly from you. Can you walk me through your concerns? I could. I spent 15 minutes laying out the assessment we'd conducted, the specific compliance failures we'd identified, and the rationale for our recommendation. I brought my tablet with the full report loaded, and I walked them through each section methodically. Graham interrupted twice to reframe things or provide additional context that was really just spin. I didn't argue with him directly, I just returned to the documented facts. When I finished, Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is thorough work. Graham, why wasn't this information included in your review proposal?" The situation has evolved, he repeated. The vendor has addressed these concerns. We're not dealing with the same company we assessed 10 months ago. Do we have documentation of those improvements? Helen asked. Graham hesitated. We have their assurances and updated marketing materials. So no independent verification, I said quietly. That's an uncharitable characterization, Graham snapped. We have a relationship with their business development team who has been very forthcoming. Marketing materials aren't the same as compliance verification, I said, keeping my voice even. If we're going to stake 18% of our procurement budget on this partnership, we need more than assurances. Helen nodded slowly. I agree. Graham, let's put this on hold until we can conduct updated due diligence. Remy, can your team handle that? Absolutely, I said. Graham's expression could have curdled milk. With respect, Helen, I'm not sure pulling Remy deeper into this is the right move given her obvious bias against the vendor. My bias, I said carefully, is toward not getting the company sued or suffering reputational damage from a bad partnership. That's literally my job. Your job is to support the business, Graham shot back, not obstruct it with excessive caution. The room temperature dropped about 10 degrees. Veronica from HR shifted uncomfortably. Helen raised one hand slightly. Graham, I appreciate your enthusiasm for growth opportunities, but risk analysis exists for a reason. Let's have Remy's team do their work. If the vendor checks out, great. If not, we've saved ourselves a problem. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Thank you both. We filed out. I headed back to my office, aware of Graham's eyes burning into my back. Thursday, I met Olivia for coffee at a place near her office, safely away from Megabit's usual lunch spots. I laid out the whole situation, the pay disparity, the blocked promotion, the silencing in meetings, the systematic dismissal of risk concerns. Olivia listened, making notes occasionally, her expression growing more serious. You have a clear case for pay discrimination, she said finally. The fact that you're being paid significantly below market rate while training people who make more than you, combined with blocked advancement opportunities, creates a pattern. Add in the retaliation for raising legitimate business concerns, and you've got multiple angles. What would you do? I asked. She smiled slightly. That depends. What do you want? Do you want to fix this and stay, or do you want to burn it down and leave? I thought about my daughter, my mortgage, my career. I want what I've earned. But I also want them to understand they can't do this to people. Those aren't mutually exclusive goals, Olivia said. But they require different strategies. If you want to stay and negotiate, we approach HR with documentation and a demand for corrective action. If you want to leave with leverage, we build a more comprehensive case and negotiate your exit package while holding the threat of legal action. What's the third option? I asked, because I could see it in her eyes. The third option is you document everything, build an airtight case, and then you give them a choice, make this right voluntarily or defend it publicly. It's riskier because you might end up leaving anyway, but it has the potential to create change beyond just your situation. I thought about Caitlin, about the other analysts on our team, about whoever would come after me. I want option 3. Olivia nodded. Then we need to be very, very careful about how we proceed. First rule, document everything. Second rule, keep your emotions in check. Third rule, build leverage before you show your hand. We spent the next hour planning. Olivia explained what constituted legal documentation versus hearsay, how to create a paper trail that would hold up under scrutiny, and what kind of evidence would be most compelling. By the time I left, I had a clear plan. Over the next 10 days, I worked methodically. I compiled every performance review I'd ever received, all positive, many glowing. I printed salary data from industry surveys and highlighted where I fell in comparison. I documented every project I'd led with measurable outcomes, cost savings, risk mitigation, process improvements. I created a timeline of my blocked promotion attempts with emails and meeting notes. Then I went broader. I pulled anonymized data on departmental pay ranges and created a spreadsheet showing the patterns. Women in technical roles were consistently paid 12 to 18% less than men in equivalent positions. People promoted internally were compensated lower than external hires for the same jobs. The risk and compliance team, which was majority women, had the lowest average pay in operations despite having the highest education requirements. It wasn't just about me. It was systemic. I also started quietly having conversations with colleagues. Not complaining, just asking questions. Hey, do you know what the typical salary range is for this role? Did you have to negotiate hard to get your offer, or was it pretty straightforward? Have you ever felt like advancement opportunities are unclear here? The conversations confirmed what I suspected. I wasn't alone in this experience. Several other people had similar stories of being underpaid, overlooked, or pushed aside when they raised concerns that complicated the narrative executives wanted to hear. Meanwhile, work continued. Graham was avoiding me, which was fine. Todd seemed nervous, which was also fine. I did my job impeccably, knowing that any slip would be used against me. Then came Friday, 3 days after my meeting with Olivia. I was at my desk, finishing up an analysis report, when my door flew open hard enough to bang against the wall. Graham stormed in, face red, tie loosened, looking like he'd just run up 3 flights of stairs. "Why didn't anyone challenge this mess?" he shouted. I looked up slowly, my expression neutral. "I'm sorry?" "The Strickland contract. We just got notification they're pulling out because of compliance issues we apparently missed during the vendor assessment. That's a $2 million relationship, gone." His voice was shaking with fury. Where was risk on this? How did this get through without proper vetting? I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew exactly what had happened because I'd flagged concerns about the Strickland partnership 4 months ago. Graham had overruled those concerns because Strickland's CEO was a friend of someone on our board. "I submitted a risk assessment memo on Strickland in July," I said evenly. "I identified 3 major compliance gaps and recommended we require them to address those before finalizing the contract. That memo went to your office and to Todd." "I never saw any memo." I opened my email, pulled up the sent message with the attachment, and turned my monitor toward him. July 18th. Subject line, Strickland Partnership Risk Assessment, Action Required. Recipients, you, Todd, and Stephen Young. I have the read receipts showing it was opened. Graham stared at the screen. His mouth opened and closed. "Well, why didn't you follow up? If it was so important, why didn't you escalate?" "I was told that operations would handle the relationship aspects and that my job was to document concerns, not make partnership decisions." I kept my voice perfectly professional. "That's what I did." "This is exactly the problem." Graham's voice went up another notch. "You're so focused on covering yourself with documentation that you're not actually thinking about the business impact. Someone should have been pushing harder on this." I felt something snap inside me. Not visibly, my face stayed calm, my voice stayed level, but internally, whatever last thread of patience I'd been holding on to just frayed apart. 3 days ago, I said quietly, you pulled me from an executive meeting and told me I asked too many uncomfortable questions. You explicitly instructed me to focus on my regular work and not obstruct business decisions with excessive caution. So I did exactly what you told me to do. I documented the risks and stayed out of the decision-making process. If that's not what you wanted, you should have been clearer in your guidance. The room went very, very quiet. Graham's face cycled through several shades of red. That's not, you're twisting. I'm not twisting anything, I said. I'm explaining the logical outcome of your direction. You can't tell someone to be quiet and then blame them for not speaking up. Get out, Graham said, his voice tight. This conversation is over. I agree, I said, and stood. I'll be sending a summary of this interaction to HR, along with documentation of my prior risk assessment and your response to it. For the record. I walked out before he could respond, went directly to my office, and spent the next hour writing the most carefully worded email of my life. I laid out the entire Strickland situation, attached all relevant documentation, and sent it to Veronica in HR, Helen, and Stephen Young. I didn't editorialize. I didn't complain. I just presented facts in chronological order with supporting evidence. Then I went home and sat on my couch, shaking. My daughter asked if I was okay. I told her work was stressful but I was handling it. She gave me a hug that reminded me why I was doing this. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting to show her that you don't accept being undervalued, that you stand up even when it's hard, that there's a difference between keeping your head down and losing your self-respect. Monday morning brought a meeting request from Veronica, discussion regarding workplace concerns, please attend at 10 a.m., conference room A. I forwarded the request to Olivia with a simple message, it's happening. She replied immediately, remember, calm, factual, documentation for everything. You're not the one who should be nervous here. Conference room A at 10 a.m. Veronica was there, along with Pierce Webster, the head of legal. Helen came in a moment later. No Graham, I noticed. That was interesting. Thank you for meeting with us, Helen began. We've reviewed your email from Friday, and we have some concerns about the situation you described. I appreciate you taking it seriously, I said. Pierce leaned forward slightly. We've also become aware that you've been compiling documentation on compensation disparities within the organization. Can you help us understand your intentions there? So they'd noticed. Probably someone in HR had flagged unusual access to salary data. I'd been careful to stay within my authorization levels, but people talk. I've been documenting my own compensation history in comparison to market rates and to colleagues in similar roles, I said. When I discovered significant disparities, I wanted to understand whether that was an isolated issue or a broader pattern. It appears to be a pattern. That's a serious allegation, Pierce said. It's a factual observation based on company data, I replied. I'm happy to walk you through the analysis. Veronica glanced at Helen, who gave a small nod. Please do. I pulled out my tablet and opened the spreadsheet I'd built. I'd sanitized it carefully, no names, just roles, tenure, and compensation bands. But the patterns were stark. I walked them through it methodically, pointing out the gaps between internal and external hires, the disparities between men and women in technical roles, the correlation between raising concerns and stalled advancement. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. This is concerning, Helen said finally. But I want to be clear about something, Remy. Are you alleging intentional discrimination? I'm alleging systematic undervaluation of certain employees, I said carefully. Whether that's intentional or the result of unconscious bias or flawed processes, the outcome is the same. People doing equivalent work are being paid significantly differently based on factors that shouldn't matter. Pierce made a note. What outcome are you looking for here? This was the moment Olivia and I had planned for. I kept my voice steady. I want 3 things. First, I want my compensation adjusted to reflect market rates for my role, experience, and contributions. Second, I want a formal review of compensation practices across operations to identify and correct systematic disparities. Third, I want assurance that raising legitimate business concerns won't result in professional retaliation. Those are significant requests, Pierce said. They're reasonable responses to significant problems, I countered. I've spent 6 years building critical systems for this company. I've been underpaid relative to market by at least 25% during that time. I've trained people who were then paid more than me. I've had advancement opportunities blocked while being told I lack qualities I demonstrably possess. And when I raise risk concerns that are later validated by events, I get blamed for not pushing hard enough while simultaneously being told to ask fewer uncomfortable questions. That's not a sustainable situation. Helen rubbed her temples. I appreciate your directness. Give us some time to review this thoroughly. Can you commit to confidentiality while we work through it? I haven't discussed this with anyone outside of appropriate channels, I said, which was technically true if you didn't count my employment attorney. But I do need to understand the timeline. I've been patient for 6 years. I can't be patient indefinitely. Understood, Helen said. Let's plan to reconvene in 1 week. That gives us time to conduct our own analysis and develop a response. I agreed, we shook hands, and I left. My heart was racing, but I'd done it. I'd put everything on the table calmly and professionally, with documentation to support every claim. Now it was their move. That week was surreal. Graham didn't speak to me at all. Todd treated me like I had a contagious disease. But several colleagues stopped by my office to quietly ask if everything was okay. Word had gotten around that something was happening, even if people didn't know details. Caitlin came by Wednesday afternoon, closing my door behind her. I heard rumors about a pay equity review, she said. Is that because of you? I chose my words carefully. I raised some concerns about compensation practices. The company is looking into it. She was quiet for a moment. When I started, Todd told me my offer was at the high end of the range. But I've been wondering lately if that was actually true, or if they just said that to make me feel good about accepting. You should ask for a formal salary review, I said. Know your market value. She nodded slowly. Thank you. For whatever you did. I think a lot of us needed someone to say something. After she left, I sat at my desk feeling the weight of that responsibility. This wasn't just about me anymore. It had never been just about me, but now I fully understood that other people were watching, hoping I'd succeed because it might mean better conditions for them too. The reconvened meeting happened exactly 1 week later. Same room, same people, but the energy was different. Helen looked tired. Pierce had a thick folder in front of him. Helen began plainly. Your review was correct. We found structural pay disparities, leftover legacy practices, uneven negotiations, too much managerial discretion. Pierce slid a document toward me, a raise to $92,000, retroactive, a modest back pay adjustment, promotion to senior risk analyst with a defined path to director. Better than before. Almost market rate. But I wasn't here only for myself. What about the broader audit? I asked. We're reviewing every department, Helen said. We'll correct disparities and implement standardized compensation guidelines. And retaliation protections? Veronica nodded. Added to policy. Confidential reporting channel. Good faith concerns protected. It was substantial. But incomplete. Pay fixes won't solve operations ignoring risk, I said. The room stiffened. That's being addressed separately, Helen replied carefully. One more request, I said. Direct access to the executive team for any high-impact risk issue. No intermediaries. Pierce frowned. Helen considered. Quarterly executive reviews, plus emergency escalation authority. Agreed. 30 minutes later, I held a revised offer letter, promotion timeline, compensation correction, and a structural channel ensuring my work reached decision-makers. I signed. In the months that followed, the dominoes fell. Graham resigned, Todd left quietly, 17 employees received adjustments, new salary bands and promotion criteria were implemented, the risk escalation process became formal policy. Imperfect, but real progress. For me, the change was transformational. The raise eased financial stress. The promotion aligned authority with responsibility. Direct executive access gave my work weight. More importantly, I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. A competitor soon offered a director role at a higher salary. I used it as leverage. Megabit countered with a new title, Director of Enterprise Risk, a meaningful raise, and 2 analysts. I stayed, not out of loyalty, but because I had influence now. Life at home changed too, college costs manageable, real vacations, fewer 70-hour weeks. My daughter noticed. She saw her mother fight and win.